While my husband was at work, I was at home, in my bed with another man. Before I continue the story, I ask you for a second to give the video a like. It doesn't bother you at all and it helps me a lot. Let's continue. Everything seemed to be under control until the door suddenly opened. At that moment, everything changed. How I came to this. Let me tell you the story from the beginning. If you want to see more real and shocking stories like this one, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Living in the heart of Tokyo in a modern apartment may sound perfect. But no one knows how far my life is from perfect. My name is Riko, I'm 47 years old and I'm married. My husband Haruto is a successful businessman, passionate about his work and always busy. He may seem like the ideal husband, but his hustle and bustle has turned our home into a silent museum. Every day is the same. In the morning, a perfunctory good morning at breakfast, followed by a day of meetings and rushing around for Naruto. When he comes home in the evening, we eat dinner in silence and he goes to bed early. We are like two strangers living under the same roof without touching each other. That routine was wearing me out. One day, knowing Haruto would be late again, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Kant. I had met him a few weeks ago at a meeting with friends. Since then, Kant had brought a kind of excitement into my life. The message was short and to the point. See you tonight. My heart began to beat fast. I stared at the phone in my hands for several minutes without answering. But something inside me was telling me that I needed a break from this monotony. Haruto's absence seemed to give me this opportunity. Fine and mind, I wrote, yes, Ben. When evening came, the doorbell rang. Who was in front of the door? In his leather jacket and relaxed attitude, he brought a vitality I hadn't felt in years. The moment he entered, the atmosphere of the house changed completely. The cold order Haruto had left was replaced by a chaotic warmth. Nice place, Ken said, looking around. A little too quiet, though, isn't it? Quiet. Yes, that was the highlight of this house. Yes, I muttered as I carried 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen. Sometimes that silence drives me crazy. Ken smiled and sat down on the couch. When I sat down next to him, I felt like I was taking the place Haruto had left empty. But that idea didn't make me uncomfortable. On the contrary, I felt a kind of comfort. As we talked, it seemed that all the words I had been holding back for years were coming out of my lips. Seeing you here like this makes me question some things, Ken said, looking at me intently. Do you really want this life? His question left me speechless for a moment. There had been a moment in my marriage to Naruto when I realized that happiness was lost. But the question of what forced me to admit it. I don't know, I answered at the end. But I know I don't want to live like this anymore. The warmth in Ken's eyes contrasted with Haruto's distant coldness. I didn't know where this moment would lead, but something inside me told me there was no turning back. I was sitting next to Ken. The atmosphere in the house was heavy and silent, but his presence filled that silence in a different way. Our coffees were over. The conversation had ceased to be in words, and now it was our gazes that did the talking. In Ken's eyes, I saw something I had long since lost, interest. It was something different from the order and security that Haruto offered me. This was a closeness that made me feel that there was still something for me. He settled back more comfortably on the sofa and looked at me carefully. Riko, are you sure you want to be here? He asked. His voice was calm and low, but his words made it clear how delicate this moment was. I thought for a long insight. Something inside me was telling me that I should stop. But I wanted to silence that voice. I turned to Kenya and felt silently. He seemed to understand my decision without me needing to say anything. Who slowly rose from the couch and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. His touch carried a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. When our gazes met, I felt the distance between us disappear completely. When I stood up, Who followed me. He put his hand on my waist and, in that instant, the reality of what was happening echoed in my mind. It was such a different touch from the cold order Haruto had brought home. This was a feeling of being truly alive. As I entered the bedroom, I felt a slight thrill. But it wasn't a thrill mixed with fear, but rather as if a desire that had been repressed for years came to the surface. Who sat me on the edge of the bed? His hands went not to my face, but to my waist. His movements were not hurried, but understanding. "Rico, are you sure?" he asked once more. The sincerity in his eyes gave me courage. I did answer, and my voice no longer trembled. The touch of one who had a closeness I had never experienced before. It was as if time had stopped. I didn't even think about Haruto. In that moment I was just here, and the weight of this instant seemed to make up for everything I had never felt before. The sound of the door suddenly opening broke all the silence in the room. Whose relaxed expression turned to rigid surprise as I could not move from the spot. Standing in the doorway was Haruto. His face wore an expression impossible to describe in words: astonishment, anger, and disappointment. All at the same time. Rico said in a deep, cold voice, "What do you think you're doing?" Who stood up from his place, but couldn't say anything. Haruto's gaze was so piercing that it seemed to drive him out of the habitat just by looking at it. "Beat it," and said to Ken. The firmness in his voice left no room for protest. Ken left silently, and the sound of the door closing echoed throughout the house. When Haruto's eyes looked back at me, the weight of the situation fell completely on me. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. The anger in his voice had given way to palpable disappointment. "I don't know," I answered quietly. But I knew that answer had no meaning. In Haruto's eyes I could read that everything had reached a point of no return. The expression on Haruto's face left me pinned to the spot. In his eyes there was more than anger, disappointment, weariness, and a deep sadness. At that moment, I understood that there was no turning back. From when Rico asked, his voice had a coldness in it that went beyond words. The words stuck in my throat. What could I say to him? But I had to answer something. "It's not something new," I said quietly. "But it's not what you think." Haruto let out a bitter laugh. "It's not what I think, so what is it? Are you taking me for an idiot?" The atmosphere in the room became unbearable. Haruto took a few steps forward and sat on the edge of the bed. "I tried to make you happy," Rico said. His voice sounded tired, but still charged with anger. "I thought everything was fine. But now I see that nothing was as I thought it was." His words went through me like a knife. But that pain wasn't enough to stop me. Because I felt no remorse. And that reality alone weighed even more. "Haruto, it's not your fault," I said, though my own voice sounded unconvincing. "This marriage, all of this, we've been missing for a long time." Who was wrong, but at the time it felt right. Haruto shook his head slowly. "Was it wrong or was it right? It doesn't matter anymore. Because it's all over, rich man. You've already given up on us." His words made the silence in the room deepen. I watched him head for the closet. He took out some clothes and began to pack in silence. "What are you doing?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "I have to go," he said calmly. "I can't stay here tonight. Maybe for much longer." As he headed for the door, he turned to look at me. The sadness in his eyes was beyond what words could express. Rico said, taking a deep breath. "I hope tonight has been worth it for you." And then he left. The sound of the door closing put an end to everything. At that moment I felt a kind of relief. With Haruto's departure, this marriage was over. But that relief was not something close to happiness. It was more like freedom. And freedom doesn't always bring happiness. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what had happened. I thought about Haruto, but mostly I thought about myself. This was a decision I had made. Good or bad, I had made it. I now had in front of me a future that only I could shape,